Hello and welcome to Taipei Scooter Style. This episode is Occupy. This video is going to be a little different than the others that you've seen before, and I suppose that may be a good thing. But to the casual observer, you'll notice that I'm riding around on a scooter in Taipei, as usual. But the point of this video is to share with you something that's going on downtown this week at the Legislative Yuan, in the heart of the government district here on Zhongshan South Road. A group of several hundred students and social activists have occupied the Legislative Yuan for the last week or so. And I thought that I would give you the view of what that looks like from a motorcycle driving around the outside. So tonight I'll be passing the Legislative Yuan and several of the other high priority buildings that the government has taken pains to surround with barricades, barbed wire, policemen. This video was made on March 21st, Friday night, a few nights ago. And at the time, the demonstrators, the protesters, were mainly inside the Legislative Yuan as well as on these two roads here on my right, Jinan and Qingdao roads. So on the night that I was riding along here, I could see the protesters who were sitting down in the distance there, but also those who were just sort of walking around on the outskirts of the demonstration area. As I rode down the center lane, since the lane we normally drive in, the scooters, is there on the right that is being used by pedestrians. And I'm at the Legislative Yuan right now, the first building, the first red square that you see. The second one is the Executive Yuan, which we'll talk about later. This is what the Lifa Yuan, the Legislative Yuan, looks like normally. That green box there is kind of a permanent protest from the DPP. That's the Legislative Yuan there. These are on Zhongshan South Road. And these scooters are all sort of hugging the curb on purpose so we can drive really slowly and get a look to see what's going on without associating ourselves too closely. I'm looking at some of the English on these posters here. Mainly the protest is about the cross-strait trade and service agreement between Taiwan and China. And the protesters are concerned that the process of approving the clauses, the content of this treaty, this agreement, has not been transparent and has in fact been conducted in a black box. And so when there was an effort last week to pass the agreement without any reading, since 90 days had passed since its introduction to the legislature, the students took this effort to occupy the legislative building, the chamber itself, in a protest. The control yet on the right hasn't been affected by the protest. It hasn't been occupied. But the building on the left, as I'm turning here, you'll see it just kind of across there, that darkened area where the lights are on the left. The Executive Yuan was occupied last night. And the group who occupied it were not closely allied with the group inside the Legislative Council. And in fact, they were somewhat more extremist in their view as to how to forward the aims of their protest, and they thought that claiming another government building would put added pressure on the government. So at about midnight last night, the police began moving in and attacking some of the demonstrators. who were in the streets behind the Executive Yuan compound. And then at dawn this morning, they renewed their violent assault on the protesters using clubs and water cannons, and succeeded in clearing the Executive Yuan compound of the protesters who were there. So most of us in Taipei woke up to that this morning, learning that news. But the night that I was making the video was 2 nights before the Executive Yuan was occupied, and I figured I would drive around the city from the Lifa Yuan, Legislative Yuan, over here to the presidential building. And as I saw the barricades here along the wall, I could see that they were along the park, I could see that they had been bolted into the ground so that they're not easily moved away. And in this section here, just going south of Aiguo West Road, toward the presidential residence where the president actually lives, President Ma, there on the right, that white wall is around his residential compound. Now I'm going through the first set of barricades. The Ministry of Finance is on the left. Some police cars. And another barricade. So this actually has a double line of barricades with some buses for riot police on the left there. So a very sensitive area. Now coming along Aiguo West Road again, along the presidential residence, heading back towards the square. And had a chance to observe one of the more unusual protesting groups that you'll see in Taipei. I've actually seen them on the street before, and they are pretty memorable because they appear to be a group of Buddhist monks with a lot of stray dogs, and they always have the ROC flag pretty prominent. Yeah. And I actually saw a photo in the newspaper this morning, of 2 of those monks being dragged away by the police in front of the Executive Yuan this morning. So now we're on the backside of the Legislative Yuan on Linsen South Road. You can see lots of the crowds, definitely more people than usual in the street, just in case you're thinking this is a normal traffic night in Taipei. Pretty heavy traffic since people are trying to get around the protest, and also there's just so many people walking around. You can see McDonald's shining brightly in the distance. So this is Zhongxiao Donglu heading toward the train station. That's Executive Yuan on the right. You can see the barricades, the yellow tape. That was a building that was occupied last night, and I watched that live on the internet. There were people walking around inside the compound with their smartphones using Ustream, and this was 2 nights before that. I thought I would come up here and take a look at what kind of fortifications had been planned. And as you can see, there are some barricades and some yellow tape, and there's a fence inside, a metal sort of sliding wall that comes out to block the entrance to the compound. And watching the video last night, I saw that that was the main entrance point for a lot of the protesters. Now I'm over on Hanyang Street, and you can see the barricades on the left. They've got about a 2-block wide perimeter around the presidential building, but as I'm trying to get around there, I run into this guy who's asking me for directions for a place out in Zhonghe, Nanshijiao. Kind of hard to give directions when he's about 10 miles away, but I did my best, told him which bridge to take. More barricades, trying to find the way around. This ended up being a dead end. But I found my way back to Chongqing South Road, and once again along the presidential residence, heading toward the bridge that'll carry me into New Taipei This has been Occupy, a special political protest episode of Taipei Scooter Style, but now to leave you with one final, only in Taiwan kind of story. So here's my take on what you just saw. The scooter riders did see the bicycle rider, but they decided to teach a lesson, to point out to him that he had not given himself enough time to get across the intersection. Rough justice? Perhaps. But that's the way of the road. Taipei Scooter Style. Occupy.